Good, even thumbs up all the way in the back. I was told to expect a script for today's introduction, which didn't materialize, so I'm going to wing it, and this ought to be kind of fun. As most of you know, this town really got going right in the middle of the 1700s as an outlying district from Northampton, which is older and more established. And there was a certain number, I've forgotten how many, of pioneer families that got building lots by some sort of a lottery system in order to get the town going. I'm sure our speaker will know a lot more about that than I do. I would think that anybody whose family has been here for, was it 7 generations, something like that? Would just
8.
Then
my grandkids is 10.
Wow. He'll have more information about that too, no doubt. Anyway, I would think that if you come from lineage like that, you know, your DNA is automatically going to make you a good townsperson, kind of a natural historian, wouldn't you think? So, what I'd like to do is introduce the speaker, my friend and neighbor, an accomplished sawyer, guitarist, and the 2024 Citizen of the Year, Barry Searle.
Thank you. Wow, can you hear this all right? I don't see any rotten tomatoes out there, so that's a good thing. I want to acknowledge a few people and thank them. Heidi Corbett, our current curator at the Historical House, the Clark Chapman House, did a lot of research and shared that. And mostly my daughter Annie, who spent a lot of time. She actually spent several months doing this research and compiling it, and she was literally up till 3 a.m. this morning finishing this off. So what I'm about to tell you is going to be less off the cuff. If it seems like I'm reading a speech, it's because I am. But this is really some fascinating stuff she came up with. And so without any further ado, we'll see how this goes. I'd like to start, her title of this is The Origins of Southampton, Pre-Contact to Pre-Revolutionary War, 30 Families or All Just One. And a note from her before I really launch into this. My original plan for this presentation was to do a general history of how Southampton came to be and focusing on each of the 30 families who were the first to settle here. Their families, where they came from and where they lived, and what happened with their children. I soon realized that this was an incredibly broad topic, and in order to do this idea justice, it would take way more time than I'd ever have time to finish the project, and would also be way too much information to fit inside an hour's time. Also, the majority of genealogical information came from the website familysearch.org, which is occasionally incorrect, to say the least. So I have to apologize now for any errors herein and advise everyone to take information gathered from there with a bit of a grain of salt, as I didn't have time to fact check all these from actual reliable sources. A project of this scope would work more effectively as a much larger thesis or even a book, and I think that's probably in Annie's future, actually. It could be expanded and better organized into a more comprehensive picture and also include visual evidence. At the very least, it's a future goal to make a large map of the area with the original family's plots of land compared to the present layout of today. And maybe next year that's something we could work towards. But I think that'd be really interesting to see how the town originally was segmented. Also, Annie's finishing here, I'd like to state the disclaimer now that for personal, moral, environmental, and socio-economical reasons, this project was done entirely without the use of generative artificial intelligence. Amen to that. She did it the old-fashioned way. And that's fitting because this is historical. So first, let's begin with recognizing and acknowledging the land that we know as Southampton as the traditional homeland occupied by several indigenous communities, predominantly the Nonotuck people. The Connecticut River Valley has been a homeland for Native peoples for at least 10,000 years. And the land that is now Southampton was once seasonal hunting grounds for the Nonotuck or Norwottuck peoples who lived in present-day Amherst, Hadley, Hatfield, and Northampton. And they were closely related to the Pocumtucks to the north and the Waronokos to the south, with other neighboring kin, including the Nipmuc in central and eastern Massachusetts, the Wampanoag around the Cape Cod area, Mohican in the Hudson River Valley, and the Pequot and Abenaki peoples. We make this statement not only to honor and recognize these past and present indigenous peoples and their sovereignty, but to remind others and ourselves that we must always be conscientious stewards of the land for which we are responsible. This is an important time to lead into, or appropriate time to lead into a broad history of how the town of Southampton first came to be. The forebears of the town founders originally emigrated from England in the early to mid 1600s to settle in Springfield, led by its founder, William Pynchon. Back then, the territory of Nonotuck consisted of the present towns of Northampton, Easthampton, Westhampton, Southampton, a part of Hatfield, and a part of Montgomery. This included a 9-mile swath on both sides of the Connecticut River. The majority of the indigenous population had moved away from the area by this time, relocating west and north due to rampant disease brought on by the Europeans, decimating the population, and also tensions between the native groups and the European settlers encroaching on their homelands and subjecting them to English notions of justice. The Nonotuck area had not been permanently occupied and had previously served as a seasonal hunting and fishing grounds during the summer, while winters were spent closer to the coast. By the time of the contact period, native communities along most of the Atlantic seaboard spoke variations of the Algonquian language and had extensive trade networks across the continent and up and down the coast. Rather than formal tribes, the social and political unit for indigenous people of southern New England was the village, kinship groupings of extended families, rarely numbering more than 300 to 500 people, who interacted and cooperated among each other. The native names of settlements referred to place descriptions. The term Nonotuck or Norwottuck, for example, means in the midst of the river. In 1653, the commissioners of Springfield, which included John Pynchon, Elizur Holyoke, and Samuel Chapin, purchased the title to the Nonotuck territory from 7 Norwottuck representatives named Wallahillawa, Nenesahalant, Nasakoshi, Riance, Pakwahalant, Asalaquanapas, and Alanamusk. That's the first time I'm seeing this, honestly. I haven't even read this yet. I apologize that it looks like I'm reading this because I am, but anyway, those Indians, chiefs, purchased for 100 fathoms of wampum, 10 cloth overcoats, smaller gifts, and sundry items, and the plowing of 16 acres of land on the east side of the Connecticut River. That was for the remaining native inhabitants to continue to plant. So all that area, all the 4 Hampton towns, part of Montgomery, part of Hatfield, was purchased for 100 fathoms of wampum. What is wampum, you ask? A side note about wampum. This was two different kinds of strung shell beads used as currency for 600 miles up and down the East Coast. The two types were white, made from the stem of the periwinkle called metiaoaxac, where 6 small beads equaled 1 English penny. The other kind was black, or dark blue or purple, made from another shellfish called poqualuhac, and had the exchange rate of 3 beads equaling 1 English penny. 1 fathom was 6 feet, and in 1643 it was estimated that 1 fathom of strung money equaled 5 shillings, though in years previous the value had been up to 9 or 10 shillings. Calculating 100 fathoms at 5 shillings per fathom, are you with me so far? The total value equaled 500 shillings, which equaled 25 English pounds in 1640s money. So roughly $33.88 then in 1640.
Manhattan was a better buy.
$28. As long as these calculations are accurate, that equals, in 2025 dollars, $1,140. All those towns. Not a bad deal. All right, we move on to drawing lots. You still hear me okay? The settlement of the Nunatak territory began the following year in 1654. That's 300 years before. Yeah. I'm just saying, with 21 planters and their families coming mostly from Springfield and Windsor. I think they mean Windsor, Connecticut. The area that would be Southampton remained mostly uninhabited for several decades or more, until Robert Lyman, a hunter from Northampton, discovered lead mines in 1679. After this, Caleb Pomeroy requested land between the branches of the Manhan River, which was the genesis of Pomeroy Meadows and Pomeroy Mountain. 2 of his sons, Eldad and Samuel, had farms covering a large area of the north of Pomeroy Meadow, now in Easthampton, and had probably come around 1700. Now, in 1730, 30 citizens of Northampton expressed interest in the still uninhabited and fertile lands between the branches of the Manhan River. They proposed dividing 90 acres to each man by lottery, and the committee met on May 25th, 1730 to work out the plan. The general method was to give each man, 1, a 20-acre house on Pomeroy's Little Mountain or Town Plot Hill, 2, 10 acres of Pine Plain or Davis Plain or in the adjoining plain lying south of Pomeroy's Little Mountain, 3, 60 more acres to complete the 90 in the best of the land, either Pomeroy's Little Mountain or Town Plot Hill or Wolf Hill. They voted on rules and regulations before surveying the land, which were, 1, each settler should be required to till and fence 5 acres before the next fall in 12 months. 2, each settler had to build and cover a house of at least 1 room, either on Pomeroy's Mountain or Town Plot Hill. 3, each should move there with his family within 2 years and live there at least 2 years. And 4, each settler manages and improves the land to satisfy the committee that he'll fulfill those conditions. So the surveying was done in May and June of 1730 by Captain Dwight, John Alvord, Ebenezer Kingsley, Jonathan Strong, and Stephen Wright. The land was divided by lottery with a number for each lot and a ticket for each man, with 1 reserved for their future minister. After the lots were drawn on June 8, 1730, several of the proprietors went out to their lots to clear small tracts of land and make general improvements and start building houses and barns. Apart from the families of Samuel and Eldad Pomeroy, it was stated that Ebenezer Kingsley was the first settler of Southampton in 1728. The first births recorded in town were children of him and his wife Mary. Ebenezer Jr., 1728, Chloe, 1731, and John in 1734. Next to settle were the families of Judah Hutchinson and Thomas Porter in 1732, and May 1733. 13 more permanent settlers who had drawn lots arrived. The names of this first wave of inhabitants were Deacon John Clark III, Joseph Clark, Samuel Danks, Phineas King, Nathan Lyman, Elias Root, Stephen Root, Nathaniel Searle, Ezra Strong, Ichabod Strong, Deacon Waitstill Strong, John Waite, and Moses Wright. Then, during the next 3 or 4 years, 14 settlers came with their families, and their names were Jonathan Bascom, Samuel Burt, Roger Clapp, Aaron Clark, Elijah Clark, Jonathan Clark, Ebenezer French, Eliezer Hannum, Elias Lyman, John Miller, Noah Pixley, Israel Sheldon, Noah Sheldon, and Stephen Sheldon. At this time, most of these families were members of the Edwards Church in Northampton, but driving to church every Sunday, especially in the winter, was difficult. Another difficulty was Massachusetts state rule that when a new settlement was formed, it needed a minister within 2 years. So a parsonage for him and his family, a large acreage for a farm, and a meeting house were also required. To meet these expenses, it was arranged that a tax of 6 pence per acre should be laid on their tract, which equaled about 4,000 total acres. As early as 1733, it was arranged that ministers from surrounding towns would come to preach to the people in their homes on Sundays and baptize their new babies. Finally, by 1733, the residents had accumulated enough taxes to begin building their new meeting house, but it was not finished until 1752, after 15 years. It's not known exactly why it took so long, but probably related to previous years of famine caused by drought and to continuing attacks between 1746 and 1748 on the settlements by small groups of Native Americans allied with the French, who were sent from Canada to conduct raids, 3 of which were on Southampton. As a result of these raids, in 1747, Elisha Clark was killed in his barn. Noah Pixley was scalped and killed the next year. Noah Sheldon and Moses Wright also died that year, and a severe drought from March to July 1749 caused a famine that led to many families leaving Southampton temporarily for Northampton. The new settlement became known as the Second Precinct of Northampton in July 1741, 10 years after its founding, and it was given the name New Hampton. This name was used until the precinct became a district in 1752, when they adopted the name Southampton. The first precinct meeting was held September 21st, 1741, to choose officers for the coming year and to seek out a new minister for the town. They trialed several candidates during the next 2 years and finally chose Reverend Jonathan Judd of Suffield, Connecticut. He was 24 years old, had graduated from Yale in 1741, and had been preaching in Suffield for 2 years. The committee invited him to preach in New Hampton for a trial period of 3 months, which he accepted. He kept a detailed diary for most of his life, with his first entry being February 3rd, 1743. And I quote, "Yesterday I preached my last sermon at Suffield. Today set out for New Hampton to preach, and with yea a while. Got to Westfield and lodged with cousin Joe Root." Due to the scarcity of the small population, the founding family's trees looked more like intertwined vines in many ways. Slim pickings back then. In trying to research and plot how everyone was related to everyone else, it became apparent that it could take years to fully understand who came from where, who married whom, and how many children were named after their parents and relatives many times over, combined with the tenuous veracity of genealogical data itself. You know, frequently they would lose babies at a very, as infants, and they'd name the next one the same name. So it got pretty confusing. Where were we here? It's probably most accurate that the core population of the townspeople, beginning from their ancestors' first arrival to the continent generations earlier and until at least the Revolutionary War, as being rather one huge extended family with a number of the same last names between everyone. Regrettably, due to time constraints, we can't explore the individual families as we had originally hoped, nor go into as much interesting details about the people involved. But we will at least give a brief overview of only some of the many notable names on the list of families. So in chronological order, beginning with Caleb Pomeroy's land claim in 1687. He was born March 6, 1641 in Windsor, Hartford, to Eltweed and Marjorie Pomeroy. Eltweed, E-L-T-W-E-E-D. Never heard that name before. They had emigrated from Somerset, England, having married there in 1627, some of many other Pomeroys who made that voyage. Caleb married Hepzibah Baker, also of Windsor, Hartford, in 1664 before relocating to Northampton. He had partial ownership of a land plot on the corner of Main, Elm, and West Streets there, but was growing a large family of 9 children, and he wanted to expand. 2 of his sons, Edad and Samuel, each had a farm in the area known as Pomeroy Meadow at the north of town. Samuel was 10 years older than Eldad and had many children, though not all of them lived past adulthood. Samuel had as many as 14 over the course of 3 wives, 5 with Elizabeth French, 3 with Joanna Root, and 6 with Elizabeth Strickland. Eldad had 8 with his wife Sarah Waite, of whom 5 married 5 of the 12 children of Nathaniel and Priscilla Searle. I always heard that there was a lot of intertwining between the Pomeroys and the Searles, so that's the generation that happened. One married one of the other earliest settlers in town, Thomas Porter. Thomas Porter and Sarah Pomeroy married in 1733 and soon afterwards settled into their new farm. They had 7 children, some of whom married into the Loomis, Clark, and Danks families in the area. Judah Hutchinson settled his farm at the same time as Thomas Porter in 1733 with his wife Sarah Phelps of Hartford, Connecticut, and they had at least 2 children. Judah's grandfather, Ralph Hutchinson, had emigrated from Northampton in England before 1656, and his great-grandmother had traveled from Bedfordshire, England, on the Mayflower in July 1629 as part of the Higginson fleet. As mentioned before, Ebenezer Kingsley and his wife, Mary Dudley, were among the very first to live in the area. They had 7 children, of whom 3 daughters married notable members of other families and had large families themselves. Tabitha married Nathaniel Loomis, and they had 7 children. Chloe married Samuel Pomeroy Jr. and had 6 children. Sarah married Moses Searle, who had no recorded children. Huldah married Samuel French and had 3 children. Noah, Stephen, and Israel Sheldon were brothers. 3 of the 12 children of Ebenezer Sheldon Sr. and his wife Mary Hunt. Ebenezer was one of 13 children himself, and his grandfather, Isaac Sheldon Sr., had moved his family from England after his father, Isaac Sheldon. Does this sound correct, Charlie?
Yeah.
So far, so good?
I couldn't track you.
Yeah, I know. If I'm wrong, I know I'll hear about it. So I lost my place. Isaac Sheldon was born. Isaac Sheldon II was born there in Essex in 1629. Mary's father, Deacon Jonathan Hunt, emigrated from Leicester, England, and she was one of 12 children herself. So move on to the Clark family. 5 members of the Clark family appear on the 1733 list of lots. Deacon John III, Joseph, Elisha, Aaron, and Jonathan. Jonathan III, Elijah, and Aaron are brothers. 3 of 14 children of Deacon John II of Northampton and Elizabeth Cook of Hartford, Connecticut. Without more time and without more clear data, it is hard to say how Joseph and Jonathan relate to each other or to the other brothers, but Elijah, Aaron, and Joseph all owned adjoining farms on Rattle Hill Road in the north section of town. The connection between the Lyman family to the town begins with Robert Lyman, who discovered the lead deposits in the area in 1679. He was born in September 1629 in High Ongar, Essex, England, and married his wife, Hepzibah Bascom of Hartford, Connecticut, in Northampton in 1662, where they had 9 children. The other 2 Lymans on the later 1733 list of 30 families, Nathan and Elias, don't actually appear to be closely related to each other or to Robert. Nathan was the son of John, who was the son of Richard, who also immigrated from High Ongar, Essex, England. He married Sarah Webb. Elias was the son of Captain Moses, who was the son of Deacon Moses Sr. and Mindwell Sheldon, daughter of Isaac Sheldon Jr., who was one of the 13 children of Isaac Sheldon Sr. from Essex, England. With regard to the Searles, more details are known due to years. This is Annie talking, remember. With regard to the Searles, more details are known due to the years of hearing family lore, and much time has previously been spent trying to imagine the logistics of 2 parents and 12 children living in a 2-room house with space to host visitors to the town. This led to taking a closer look at ages and dates and timelines. I can interject here that I was always told that Nathaniel Searle had the first 2-room house in town. So when visiting ministers came, he would be the host. And he was a fairly prosperous fellow. All right, so when Nathaniel and Priscilla moved their family to their new homestead on High Street, kind of near, you all remember Lester Emerson, where his house was? It's sort of across there and a little bit away from Fulmer Road. There's a meadow there right now where that house was. And he was 47. This was in 1733. He was 47 and she was 38. They had 9 of their 12 children by that point. So already they had a full family. Their approximate ages when they moved in 1733 was Nathaniel Jr. at 18, Priscilla Jr. at age 17, Rachel 15, Mercy 13, Eliphaz 11, Hosea 9, Aaron 7, Moses 4, and Gideon 2. Aaron Searle ended up with the farm where the Labries are out on Valley Road, where real Labries farm is. That was originally his. And Gideon had a place out on Pleasant Street. Yeah, where your grandkids are now, actually. Then Bildad was born that year when they moved. Zophar was born 2 years later in 1735. He's where I come from. And finally, Job was born 6 years later in 1739. This meant that there were 24 years between the birth of their oldest and their youngest, and it meant that Priscilla was having babies from the time she was 20 till when she was 44. By the time Jonathan Judd stayed with the family in 1743, at least three of the oldest, Nathaniel Jr., Rachel, and Mercy, had all left home and gotten married, all to Pomeroys, by the way. Eventually, seven of the 12 children married Pomeroys. This left 9 children plus 2 adults in 2 rooms, plus any guests, still unimaginably crowded, but by all accounts, they made it work. So all of the 12 children eventually got married, and except for one, all had many children themselves. Eventually, Nathaniel and Priscilla would have 114 grandchildren. Ted Hendricks said one time that the town of South, there were a lot of Searles. There were more Searles in the cemetery than any other family. And Ted Hendricks said that the town was infested with them. He also had another line. He said, "There's nothing more boring than hearing about somebody else's genealogy." And here I am. So 114 grandchildren with an age range difference of 40 years between them all. Besides the Pomeroys, the other spouses came from families of the other town founders: Bartlett, Danks, Kingsley, Hannum, Clark, and Strong. Nathaniel was a prosperous farmer and eventually owned more land on both sides of the main road and on the Great Mountain Brook. He would eventually bequeath to each of his 9 sons plots of land for them to build their own farms in the area. So I mentioned Aaron Searle. Another son, you know where Gilbert Road, the Gannadic farm? That was one of them. There was a Stephen Searle had a farm up on Fomer Road. You can still sort of see the cellar hole right about when the road turns to dirt and it makes a sharp turn. And Zophar Searle, where I come from, and that was established on the land between, well, where Russellville Road is, but the main road to Westfield, from Northampton to Westfield, used to actually run through our land, and it wasn't down Flat Hill. It went to the right or to the west, and it went along the base of Wolf Hill. That's just a wood road right now. But Zophar established that. And, so I'm descended from that line. But one of his sons was Joel Searle, who ended up moving to Huntington and bought up Norwich Hill. And there's a Searle Road there named after him. All that acreage in Norwich Lake, and he sold it for peanuts. Another great move by the Searles. But anyway. Now, let's see. Now, nearing conclusion, all of the previous inhabitants of this area, from archaic native peoples 10,000 years ago, to the Nonotucks in more recent centuries, to the first European settlers and their families, have had their livelihood and well-being tied directly to the land itself and the resources it produced. All the work they did over the centuries and the strategic burning of the woodlands, planting of native crops, the cultivation of livestock, and subsistence farming, the evidence of all these centuries of activity is still in the dirt we live on today. All the sawdust of all the wood used to build the first houses and farms, the livestock manure spread on the planting fields for fertilizer year after year, the ash from all the fires they ever burned, and all the dust they ever swept out the door, all that still exists in some form on the soil under our feet. For the descendants of the first founders who still remain in the area, perhaps this is one reason for the connection still felt to the place. Despite the obvious beauty and peace of the natural setting, with such a direct connection to family going back so far, this is where their soul is planted. That's from Annie.
Yeah. Well written.
Thank you. I'm just the messenger. This is all from Annie.
Where is she today?
She's sleeping right now. She was literally, she spent months doing this research, and she was up till 3 a.m. getting it typed out and emailed to me. So I got to look at it over breakfast and spew it out to you folks. Thank you for your patience. Any questions or comments or anything? Yeah.
It was interesting when you were reading about this intermarriage in the town and how everybody seemed to, I'm Charlie Fisher, for those of you who don't know. Barry's neighbor. I'm Barry's neighbor.
Turn it on.
It's not working.
Wait a minute. Is I shut it off?
The
No, it's on.
Okay, and the Sheldons and the Searles have been neighbors ever since the founding of the town.
Is there a volume?
Anyway, can you hear me back there?
I think that's as good as it gets, folks. Oh, that's the volume. Try it now.
Okay, can you hear me?
Not through the microphone, we can hear you.
Maybe I broke it.
I don't know.
Yeah. Stop it there.
Well,
You're broken.
oh,
You broke it.
this is technology at its best. All right. Yeah, you should be good now.
Okay, where I was going with this was the intermarriage between families. Even when I was going to school in Shelton County, this is back in the 30s and 40s, the town was basically the same. When I would go to school, I probably had about 8 or 10 cousins that I was going to school with. And it was just the way that the town was, I think, all the way up until the town started expanding in the 60s. But up until then, the population was, say, 1,100 to 1,200 year after year after year. And it's just the way it was. It was kind of fun. And because when you go to school, it was, you were just going to, not with neighbors, but you're going to school with family. And so, anyway.
Yeah.
But, when you were talking about the road that went down back to Westfield, that's where the Searle original homestead was, way back.
Yeah. Oh, it's good. Yeah, I can tell them about that.
Anyway, the house that I lived in was built by Israel Sheldon when he settled the town. And been fortunate enough to have it in the family for 7 generations now. And anyway, some of the stories from my grandmother when I was growing up in the 30s was when the land was all cleared at that time. If you look at pictures of the town of Southampton back in the late 1900s, 1800s, the land was all cleared. And anyway, some of the stories from my grandmother was when when either a Searle or a Sheldon was going to give birth and the land was all cleared, the house that was the original Searle house down by the pond, whoever was giving birth just hung a lantern in a window and a Sheldon would go to help them, and vice versa. And that was kind of a good story.
Yeah, thank you, Charlie. I was going to mention a little bit more about that first house in Guilford. The cellar hole is still there. That's on the kind of the private, we've got the trail, the nature walking trail up off Fulmer Road, but on the private part is where the original homestead was. There's a cellar hole there still now. And in 17, I meant to bring this and have more visual stuff for you, but couldn't get it together. In 1830, that original house of Zophar Searle burned down. And that was his son Cornelius, lost his eyesight. during the fire, and everything was just leveled. And it turned out to be a temporary loss of his eyesight, but in the interim of the 6 or 8 weeks while he was recovering, the townspeople got together and built a new house for him on Russellville Road, which is still standing. It's actually the house I was born in, which is 52 Russellville Road. The townspeople got together and built that for him. So that became the homestead house that's right on Russellville Road. And that was in 1830. And there were a number of characters in the Searle family over the years I can share. There's a Reuben Searle who fought for the Union Army, and when it was about in the mid-1990s, they rededicated the Civil War monument at the cemetery, and I was asked to read a letter that he had written to his parents from the battlefield. I spent all night last night trying to find it. I was going to read it to you today, but it was very heartfelt. And as he was writing his letter, he was given the news that his commander, who he adored, had been shot and killed. And it was right in the letter, and it was very touching letter. He ended up moving out to Kansas, Lawrence, Kansas, and became a surveyor and laid out the town of Kansas. There's another character named Oliver Searle, who was a local layabout, who, the story goes, when the farmers were out in the fields working, he would go by there and steal their lunch. And when they confronted him, he'd say, "Oh, your people can get more." And I don't know whatever happened to him.
Well, I happen to be in a Searle house.
Oh.
But also I wanted to say, did you say that Annie is going to write this is such wonderful information.
I think that's in the cards, yeah.
Oh,
She used to be
that would
the,
be wonderful.
yeah, I want to encourage her with that.
Yeah.
She used to be the curator at the Clark Chapman House until she got a full-time job. But she enjoys this, so I hope so.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Yes?
How did the 30 settlers, 30 families from Northampton gain access to the land? Did they buy it from the Springfield people who had bought it from the Indians?
It was a lottery, I think.
I know, but how did they have title to it if the Springfield people
There.
bought it?
Do you know that answer,
Yeah,
Tom?
it was a grant for the king.
Oh, really?
And in order to keep the grant, they had to have the 5 acres cleared and one room covered with a fireplace in the first year. And that, it was just granted from the king.
So the king took away the land that the Springfield people had bought?
Yeah.
I think it was all tied together somehow.
Yeah.
It was authorized by the king, maybe?
Yeah, I think that once the land was bought, we were still part of, we were still under the King of England. And so when they decided to have the lottery and hand out the grants,
Yeah.
then each one had the responsibility of filling the requirements for the grant, and then they just kept it. And it was a way of populating the area.
Right. Establishing a foothold in the area. Does that answer?
No, not really. I mean, why wouldn't the people from Springfield then have had a lottery?
They probably did.
Yeah, so they bought this whole area, all these 4 Hampton towns in Montgomery and Hatfield from the Indians.
Yeah.
And they had, once that was under the king's, the auspices of the king, ultimately. And as a way of breaking it down and establishing the area, he authorized some type of lottery to get people here on the land.
I just wondered how the people from Springfield got cut out when they had bought it in the first place.
I don't think it was Springfield. If anything, it was Northampton.
You know,
They left Springfield behind them, right?
yeah, you know, my understanding was that my 7th great my 7th great-grandfather, Isaac Shelton, had come from England. And he went, and he was one of the ones that settled Suffield. And then a group that went to Northampton went from Suffield to Northampton. They bypassed Springfield. And then after they sold Southampton, after they sold Northampton, then it was several years after that they had the lottery, and probably had the lottery. Easthampton came later, but they probably also had a lottery for towns north of Northampton. And because a lot of the, after Isaac Shelton, his children, they settled areas north of Northampton, and others went west of the river and so forth. That's the process.
Anybody else? That's about all I've got to say.